Coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
Hello, everyone. I'm Roger Ver. I was the first person in the world to start investing in the cryptocurrency and blockchain ecosystem. I've been involved almost 10 years full-time now, and I'm really excited to be a part of Reimagine 2020.
Hey, everybody. It is Patrick McLain, one of your guests here for Reimagine 2020. Obviously, we're going live for 72 hours. We have, a large amount of speakers, right? But not all of them as special as I think the one that we're about to have right now. A lot of you have heard his name, I'm assuming. For those that haven't, I'll let him introduce himself in a bit more detail so I don't butcher it. But, I know him as one of the first investors in the space, definitely hands-on, I think very opinionated, and has his vision for what, this community should really be and some of the direction that should be taken. So before I go on too long, Roger, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe tell everybody a bit about how you got into the space?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. So for those that don't know, I'm Roger Ver. I was the very first person in the entire world to start investing in this ecosystem. And I had the very first established business to start accepting Bitcoin for payments. Way back in 2011, my company Memory Dealers started accepting Bitcoin for payments all over the world. And then in 2012, I launched another website called bitcoinstore.com that only really old-time crypto people will remember. But before that, everybody said, oh, Bitcoin, yeah, what can you buy with it? Well, with the launch of that website, we could now say more than 500,000 consumer electronics products you could buy with Bitcoin at prices generally cheaper than Amazon. And that was a real big turning point that led to this mass adoption around the world of cryptocurrencies being used as currencies. And that's what excited me so much about this, is that now we don't have to depend on governments or banks or PayPal or whoever to give you permission to send and receive money with people over the internet. Now you can just do it permissionlessly, and you don't need permission from anybody, and it works for everybody, young or old, rich or poor, black or white, worldwide. What could possibly be more exciting than that on the internet? And so it just sucked up my entire life, devoted every waking moment to promoting that for almost 10 years now, full time.
Definitely. And I know there's a lot to unpack there, and I want to try to get to it here over this call. But before we kind of go down that path, and you and I were talking earlier, there's for the 3,000-4,000+ students watching this, do you mind giving them your perspective a little bit? Like, what was your past journey even before blockchain? Like, what kind of led you up into this space, right? Like, what were your past experiences that you think kind of made this the right fit for you?
Yeah, and I definitely had a great convergence of my background to be the person to appreciate this before just about anybody else. So my hobby for years before the invention of Bitcoin had been studying economics and monetary theory and what the origin of money is and how something comes to be used as money. And so I was reading all sorts of books on this subject by people like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard and Milton Friedman and these great thinkers in human history. And then there's a whole other story that I suppose we could do a whole other podcast on, but I actually did some time in a federal prison. And while I was in federal prison, though, I got to see on a micro scale exactly how the economy within the prison works. And I got to see the empirical evidence right before my eyes that the theories I had read about in the books about how something comes to be used as money was true in practice. So the book said in theory, something that's easily divisible, easily transportable, you can store for a long time, it's easily recognizable, and it has some other use there, wind up becoming used as money. And that was like how gold and silver and things like that came to be used as money historically. And right there within prison, I saw the exact thing happen in practice with tobacco, right? Because tobacco's easily storable, easily divisible, easily recognizable. It doesn't go bad, and then people can smoke it. So like it naturally became used as money in the prison there. So I got to see not only were the theories from the books right in theory, but I got to see in practice they were true because it definitely happened right there. And so my other background, I've been using computers my entire life. Have the right computer science background to understand technically how Bitcoin worked. I ran one of the most popular bulletin board systems in Silicon Valley for anybody that's still old enough to remember BBSs, which will really date me as to how old I am now. But anyhow, when Bitcoin came along, I could understand the economic reasons why this was going to be useful as money. And I could understand technologically how nobody could shut this down or stop it or block the payment. So this was, the most exciting thing to ever emerge in front of me in my life. And I had the right situation. I had some financial resources, and I was in the right spot at the right time with the right resources to promote this to the world. So the first thing I did is I took out a giant billboard on the side of the expressway in Silicon Valley promoting that we accept Bitcoin. I started paying for radio station ads on more than 100 radio stations across America, promoting Bitcoin and telling people that they can use it as money. This is back in 2011 when the price was like $2 each, just to be clear with the timing on all this. So yeah, it's just been a wild, wild ride. And the part that I think has maybe changed the most, though, is in the early days, everybody knew that Bitcoin was money. It was a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It said that right there in the title. And everybody's goal was to build the tools and the infrastructure to enable people to actually use it as money. And then today, the narrative has changed, though. The narrative behind Bitcoin is no longer that it's money. They actually, mock people who want to use it for payments and for money. And so for me, the narrative with Bitcoin today is, oh, it's a store of value. Well, if you pick up an economics book, you'll realize that nothing can be solely a store of value without having some additional use case. The reason everybody in the US uses dollars as a store of value is because you can spend them anywhere. The reason people use real estate as a store of value is because you can live in the house or use the building for a business. There's nothing ever in the entire history of humankind that's only used as a store of value and doesn't have some additional secondary use case. So if people think that Bitcoin is going to be only used as a store of value without having some secondary use case, you have another thing coming. It's just a Ponzi scheme if that's the case. And that's why today I'm so much more bullish about the cryptocurrencies that actually have secondary use cases. Things like Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, of course, Dash, Monero, the ones that are actually trying to get people to use them for something other than just being a store of value. Because if you want to use, something as a store of value, it has to have some reason that people would want to use it. A real reason isn't, oh, everybody else is going to use it too, and then nobody does anything with it. That just doesn't make any sense for me. And so it's heartbreaking for me to say that as the first person in the world who started promoting Bitcoin. But the thing that I started promoting in 2011 that was called Bitcoin then, the thing that everybody's calling Bitcoin today is a totally different thing and has almost nothing to do with it. Bitcoin Cash and a bunch of other cryptocurrencies are much more similar and much more exciting to me than what everybody's calling Bitcoin today. But everyone sees the number, oh, Bitcoin's $10,000 each. It's so exciting. And like, okay, go for it. But I think in the long term, utility is what drives mass adoption, and the mass adoption is what will drive the price in the long term. So I'm very, very bullish on the future of Bitcoin Cash. It could easily go up 1,000 times in price from where it is today. Bitcoin, it's never even going to go up 100 times from where it is today. I'd be absolutely stunned if it did that.
Got it. All right. So again, a lot to unpack. And just, I want to pivot to some of these points, but I think one thing I want to try to pull out a little bit, because I think it gets lost in people sometimes, like how many nuances, right? How many stories, like people hear so many stories about this little battle over here, or these developers are taking, and kind of how things change direction. Do you mind kind of just walking the audience through a little bit? Like when would you say you first got into blockchain? Like, is there a year that you put a label on it?
So there's, I guess, two answers to that question. So I first got involved with Bitcoin in, I think, February of 2011, but I've been aware of cyber cash, or the permissionless cash for the internet. I've been aware of that since like the late 1990s, having read about it in science fiction books like Cryptonomicon, and reading about it in nonfiction books like Future Imperfect by David D. Friedman, which is still a fantastic book to read to this very day. And he was just an amazing visionary as to what sort of things were going to be possible and take place on the internet once the invention of peer-to-peer electronic cash comes into existence. So he predicted, David Friedman predicted all this. He predicted the Silk Road, he predicted Bitcoin, he predicted all these things more than a decade before the actual invention. And so if you go back and read his book today, it's just so incredibly insightful to this very day. So maybe I heard about it in the 90s. Maybe I heard about it, when it came out. So I guess the answer is both of those things.
Got it. So take me to 2011, if you don't mind. Like, can you describe like the space in 2011? Just the high level bullet points. And I think we'll just maybe jump around the years after, and I want to hear a little bit about specifically what you think kind of evolved.
Yeah. So in 2011, the excitement and the euphoria and the enthusiasm, and it felt like Bitcoin was going to become money for the entire world in the course of just a couple of months. Everybody's going to hear about it and they're going to see, oh my gosh, this is so much better than all the government issued currencies. We're going to switch to this just basically overnight. And here we are a decade later, and there hasn't been nearly as much adoption as I thought was going to happen in maybe the first year. And you talk about, there's just so many different side stories and so many different, little pieces of drama here and there. And if you didn't live through it, you wouldn't be aware or know of it. But Bitcoin, and obviously people will disagree with me on this, but Bitcoin, from my point of view, clearly was hijacked. The entire point of the project was to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And today nobody's trying to use Bitcoin as cash, but yet they want to claim the Bitcoin name. And so that's probably the biggest piece of drama that went on over the 10 years, is that everybody that's calling Bitcoin today, they don't realize that it's not the same thing that got all the early people excited about Bitcoin to begin with.
And do you think it was hijacked before 2011, after, right when you got into it, or?
I think it was an ongoing attack. And so here's an example of this, that like very, very, very few people, even in crypto today, will have any idea that this has been going on so long. So in like 2015 or so, the main Bitcoin discussion platform, our Bitcoin, engaged in a massive censorship thing that's going on to this very day, where you're not even allowed to talk about why Bitcoin Cash might be a good alternative to what everyone's calling Bitcoin today. Almost everybody knows about that. What they won't know about is that in 2011, in June, the price of Bitcoin in the course of just a couple of weeks went from $2 or $3 to $30, right? So it went up about 10x in about 2 weeks or so there. And everybody around the world, including the media, was paying some attention to Bitcoin at that point because it just went up 10x in 10 days. That's a really, really big deal. And the main discussion platform for everybody who was interested to talk about Bitcoin back in 2011 was another website called bitcointalk.org. And what happened when all of a sudden people were the most interested and most excited and wanted to talk about Bitcoin the most, with new people coming in that were interested, the platform of bitcointalk.org became unusable because it was just flooded with these accounts that nobody knew and didn't recognize the name, just posting fluff comments that weren't like of any substance whatsoever, like price is going up, buy, sell, oh no, look at this, right? And they would just flood the forum with a whole bunch of posts, so you couldn't actually, find the posts that were actually people saying interesting things, that were having interesting thoughts. So like whoever or whatever entity it was that was attacking Bitcoin, they were already doing it since 2011 of June. The moment every new person wanted to learn about Bitcoin, they turned off the discussion platform effectively and made it impossible for anybody to use it by flooding it with just nonsense fluff comments. And so I think a lot of people won't be aware of that today, that this has been going on since at least 2011. And if you think about a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, this is one of the most disruptive technologies to ever come into existence for all of humankind, where it empowers individuals against the control of the state. And for me, as a libertarian and someone who thinks that each individual owns themselves and owns their own life, this is fantastic. What could possibly be more exciting about empowering individuals to have more control over their own life? But the people that have the most to lose are the existing nation states, right? If suddenly nobody has to use the money they're issuing and they no longer have the ability to control the flow of money, that's an absolute disaster for nation states that want to control the economy and control people. And the NSA in 2010, right, when Bitcoin was just pennies, reached out to some of the Bitcoin software developers and asked them, hey, can you explain this Bitcoin thing to us? And can you tell us about this? So the NSA was already looking into, or maybe, I'm sorry, it was the CIA. I'm sure the NSA was looking into it as well. But the CIA publicly invited these Bitcoin software developers to say, hey, can you explain this Bitcoin thing to us? So if the CIA was looking into it in 2010, there's, I guess, two reasons that they could be doing that I can think of at the moment. One is they want to use it for themselves somehow. Two, they want to disrupt it because it's going to be a disruption to their funding ability. And I think probably both of those things were the real reasons. But the CIA has unlimited money from the U.S. government. They can print and tax as much as they want, and then they can use it to fund the CIA to do their drug running and gun smuggling and assassination projects all over the world. Of course, they'd be upset with Bitcoin, because if the entire world were to start using Bitcoin as money, the CIA's money gets cut off, right? And I think that's a great thing that the CIA's money gets cut off. The CIA would be really upset about that. This is an organization that's been around for decades and likes to pull strings all over the world. You think they're going to let the rug be pulled right out from under them without doing anything? No, you'd be naive to think that. So I don't think it's a wild conspiracy theory to think that maybe the CIA or some other government agencies had a lot to do with the undermining of Bitcoin being able to be used as peer-to-peer electronic cash. And one more tangent on that too. In 2013, the IRS came out with a ruling that Bitcoin is not money, it's property. And so if Bitcoin is property, that means everybody has to record every transaction they do and report their capital gains tax on it. Whereas if Bitcoin had been money, everybody could have just used it as money and you wouldn't have to jump through these 1,000,001 capital gains tax reporting hoops in regards to the use of Bitcoin. And so then another company called Blockstream, who raised like $100 million from traditional financial companies, went out there and they did everything they could to make sure that Bitcoin was viewed as a store of value, as property, not usable as money. And then they broke Bitcoin's ability to be used as money. And that's exactly what the IRS wanted, right? So, and then all these useful idiots on the internet also are saying, yeah, Bitcoin's a store of value, don't use it as money. And so they're just, I look at all these people out there in regards that are, agree with them or not. Look at the people that are protesting against the coronavirus lockdowns out there, right? This is an example of Stockholm Syndrome. So the people that don't agree with the lockdowns, they're out there protesting, but they're waving American flags out there like the very entity that's oppressing them from their point of view in regards to the lockdown. So like, if you're protesting what the American government's doing to you, why would you be waving American flags at the protest? And it's the exact same thing with the cryptocurrency stuff. There's all these people that basically, unknowingly are participating in the, kind of a form of Stockholm syndrome, where the U.S. government is undermining Bitcoin's ability to be used as money, and the people that have the chance to benefit the most from if Bitcoin were to be able to be used as money around the world are there saying, yeah, don't use Bitcoin as money. And it's just, it brings a tear to my eye to see that happen. So that's the end of my rant at the moment. Feel free to unpack it however you'd like.
No. And one part I agree with you on, and I've always thought about it, and sometimes I think people look at it and they kind of minimize it. I think, you have the Craig Wrights of the world that say, let's link with banks, right? I want to go to the regulators. I want to make it really easy on them for tax purposes or whatever, which I think in that part of him, a lot of people don't understand. On the other half, it's like people look at it as purely it's Libra or, right, some form of a kind of bank war. But in reality, I think the biggest, I know this is a risk to the U.S. government, right? Because people can't, if they can't collect taxes, that's a huge issue for them, right? If this becomes a form where people can kind of move around it. B, America only drops bombs on certain countries nowadays, right? And the rest of them, or, the Russias and North Koreas, they're going around trying to sanctioning them, right? And it becomes a lot harder to sanction or get somebody kind of bend your will if you cut them off from, the SWIFT financial system when they can pass $1 billion in a coffee shop on a USB stick, right? So I can't imagine that they're not looking at it, right, from kind of the geopolitical landscape and saying, is this one of our biggest like war, right, or deterring efforts, right, where we want a dictator to act a certain way, and us being able to control the dollar or their banks doesn't really influence them. I want to move on past 2011, but one last question on 2011. So you enter the space. Obviously, you're seeing a bunch. It seems like you kind of, I know it's like Silk Road 2010. I think Bitcoin maybe started to get a little bit of a stigma bolted onto it of, people are using it for drugs or whatever, right? Maybe that's what certain law enforcement agencies or whatever really wanted to make sure that was out in the public psyche. When you came into the space, what was your kind of first on-ramps? And it seems like you were doing multiple things. And in a certain way, I've kind of sees a bit of an evangelist, where you're going out putting up billboards, stuff like that, probably things other people weren't doing. You're a bit more kind of ballsy with it, right? Which I think the space needs a little bit more of. So what was kind of your position in 2011? Like, what did you feel your role was in the space?
Yeah, so I was basically the main marketer for Bitcoin. I put up these billboards, I paid for the radio ads, and then I started funding businesses in the ecosystem. There were no venture capital funds, at that point. There was basically nobody interested in that point. That's why the price was so low. So the first investment, I think, was a company out of New York that allowed people to buy Bitcoin via cash deposits at Walgreens and Walmart and CVS and places like that. And then I also started selling. I don't know if it was 2011 or 2012 at that point, but I started selling Bitcoin, physical Bitcoins, for credit cards and PayPal payments. And so for my previous business, I knew how to deal with credit card fraud issues, because we had people every single day with stolen credit cards, or trying to buy stuff from us, because I was selling computer memory. It was one of the main targets for people with stolen credit cards. Bitcoin is probably about the only thing better than computer memory to buy if you have a stolen credit card, but I knew how to handle that from selling memory. So we sold thousands of Bitcoins to people all over the world and accepted credit cards and PayPal to do that. And this was back in like 2011 and 2012. And so it was a fantastic way for people to be able to get their first Bitcoin, because back then, there wasn't Coinbase. The Coinbase, hadn't even started to, become an idea yet with with those guys. There weren't any of these websites. There were no mobile wallets on your phone. There wasn't an app you could download. The only wallet there was the full node, desktop. It's called Bitcoin QT back then, the entire full node thing that you'd have to download gigabytes worth of the blockchain to do that. So like my role at that point were two things. One, chief marketer, and then two, like chief or only investor. I was the only person in the world investing in these startups. And there were dozens and dozens of them all over the world that I just, sprinkled with seed capital to try and get them going.
Well, and I think that's one thing, from the outside, and, I only know a little bit about you and the first time talking with you, but that's kind of what I've always seen you as, right? And I'm sure a lot of times it was a thankless job, right? Like most things people do that are.
Back then it was all right. Today there's a bit more hostility because people they view Bitcoin as the store of value, and they see every other cryptocurrency as a threat to its market share. And from my point of view, I own Bitcoin, I own Bitcoin Cash, I own Ethereum, I own a couple dozen different cryptocurrencies. Let's make them all as useful as we possibly can. Instead of fighting as to what percentage slice of the pie your favorite cryptocurrency has, let's grow the entire pie so that people all over the world get to use this. So a lot of people won't know this. So I put up the seed money to start Ripple, right? If you're familiar with XRP, I was the second person ever involved in that. It was my money that started that company. And that was back in 2011 or 12 as well. So I've never, ever been a maximalist. And the reason I'm such a big fan of Bitcoin Cash today is because of all the cryptocurrencies out there in the world. I think Bitcoin Cash has the best chance of becoming cash for the world and bringing more economic freedom to people all over the world and stripping away government's ability to control people all over the world. Tomorrow, if I thought it was XRP, I'd promote that. If I thought it was BTC again, I'd promote that. If I thought it was something else, I'd promote that. So it's not a case of tribalism or maximalism for me. It's a case of which one's has the best shot at bringing more economic freedom to the world. And if you look at the fundamentals and the network effect and the user experience, Bitcoin Cash is right up there at the top of the list.
So for anybody listening, especially for the students that are listening that are the 19 to 22-year-olds, and you guys are kind of in the space a little bit, right? And you probably missed a lot of the drama that happened in the last few years, right? You might know a little bit about it. And there might be some experts on this call. There might be some people that think they're experts, and the general population, right? But I think these types of conversations, right, especially I think revisiting some of this past a little bit, people don't know, right? Like I bet you most people didn't know you're one of the first investors into Ripple, right? And
yeah, not one of the first. The first. I was the second person. Period. So Jed McKeown had the idea, and I put up the money, and then I was one of the very first people also in Zcash. I put up the money to start Zcoin is another one. And then I've just been involved. I was technically the second person ever involved at blockchain.com as well. The guy founded it and he needed some money to buy a real server because he was running it on a Mac Mini in his mom's bedroom. So I gave him some money to do that. And then I started doing the customer service emails for him way back in the early days. So there's a lot of that. Now, a great book, actually, if I can recommend a book that covers the early history of Bitcoin and adoption, is called, ironically enough, it's called Digital Gold by Nathaniel Popper. It's really it reads like a science fiction novel. It's a really exciting book, but it's all the parts of the book that I have firsthand direct knowledge of. He did a really, really excellent job of making them accurate. So,
got it. So and again, like this, I think this is why you guys probably need to listen to Roger, right? It's because it's where you might associate him now with what he's doing today, right? And all the noise sometimes in our news cycle kind of drowns everything out, where we can only see what's right in front of us, right? It's important to really have context into maybe why people have their opinions, right? Why they have this perception or why they care. It's because they didn't just come into it yesterday, right? This is one of the first investors on planet Earth into
not one of the first, the first.
Yeah. All right. All right. Now I have to update it for the rest of the conversation. So let's pivot off 2011. So can you kind of take me to the next important, I mean, I know maybe it's Mt. Gox 2013. Can you kind of tell me the next timeline milestone where you think is something really, a monumental shift is really taking place?
Yeah, one of the big turning points, I think, in Bitcoin was when Mt. Gox got hacked. And that was a really, really big deal. And everybody remembers the final closure of Mt. Gox, but there was another one also in 2011. And then there was no price for Bitcoin because Mt. Gox was the only exchange in the entire world for Bitcoin. And so suddenly when Mt. Gox was offline, nobody knew what the price of Bitcoin was. So it made it almost impossible to do business with it because you didn't know what the price was. And then later on, when Mt. Gox collapsed, obviously that was a big problem and people lost a huge amount of money, and it was definitely a disaster. But there were already a whole bunch of other cryptocurrency exchanges out there in the world right there ready to pick up the slack for Mt. Gox. So I don't think that that was actually as big of a problem as the first time that Mt. Gox was offline because of a hack.
So, I mean, do you think it's that time around 2013, or is there another moment? Like, is there another moment that sticks out? You think like the kind of community is at like a tipping point to a certain extent, and like what are those factors?
Yeah, another real big, I guess, growth moment for Bitcoin was this company called Bitpay that again helped put up the seed money to start, and so Bitpay really got some big merchants on board to start accepting Bitcoin for payments. So they got companies like Tiger Direct and Newegg and Microsoft and Steam. They got some of these really big players in 2013, and it was really Bitcoin clearly was growing around the world, and more people were starting to use it for payments. And you could feel the excitement and the passion. And there were, blockchain.info's number of wallets we're using. Coinbase was growing like crazy. Like every aspect of the ecosystem was growing like crazy. And the number of transactions happening every single day was growing up and up and up. And there were more people around the world using Bitcoin for more things in real commerce that, every week than the week before. And you can see, and there's a really clear correlation between the price of Bitcoin and the amount of transactions and people using it on chain. And then this civil war within Bitcoin started to brew, where people saw that there was this 1 megabyte limit coming up on Bitcoin, in which people inside of 1 megabyte.
And this is like 2013, 2014, like when does this start?
So you know what? Great point. So there was actually one little skirmish in this battle that happened even earlier. This probably happened in 2014. There was a change added to Bitcoin that so the rule on Bitcoin up to that point had always been what's called first seen, first safe, which meant if I send you Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network, and then before it's included in the block, I try and send that Bitcoin back to myself or to somebody else, the miners all just ignore it. They saw the transaction sending it to you first. They ignore any transaction that they see afterwards going to somebody else. They just ignore it. And so in 2014, probably, a guy named Peter Todd and some others came up with this idiotic idea to change the rule from first seen, first safe to this thing called replace by fee, which meant if I send you Bitcoin and I pay a 1 penny fee to send you $100 for whatever I'm buying, I can then rebroadcast that same transaction and pay a 2-cent fee or a 10-cent fee or whatever amount I want and send the money back to myself. And so instead of the money going to you, the money then comes back to me as long as I paid a higher fee. And they called this replace by fee. And it was very contentious within the Bitcoin community. So the Bitpays and everybody that was trying to use Bitcoin as money said, no. Once you've sent the Bitcoin, that needs to be it. And these other people argued, no. You need to be able to reverse the transaction by paying a higher fee until that transaction is included in a block. And so that was a really big problem for every business that was accepting Bitcoin, and is still a problem to this very day. Where businesses that are accepting Bitcoin for payments, it's not very safe for them to accept it because the transaction could be double spent on the network. In fact, we just saw, and I hate to even use the word attack because it's not really an attack. They intentionally designed the system that way. But just a month or so ago, there was a payment processor in Australia that was accepting Bitcoin for payments. And you could take just a regular old normal Bitcoin wallet, send the payment to the merchant to buy your sandwich or coffee or whatever they were trying to sell, get your sandwich, and then go right back in your wallet and send the money right back to yourself. And this was just a couple of weeks ago this was demonstrated. So the response from that payment processor that was accepting Bitcoin, along with a number of other cryptocurrencies on their platform, they turned off Bitcoin. And so now their main payment that's being used on that platform is Bitcoin Cash, because once you send a Bitcoin Cash transaction, it's not reversible. And that's not something that's new to Bitcoin Cash. That's how Bitcoin used to work until these same people that wanted to limit the block size and limit its usability as cash changed that to allow this replace by fee feature. And there was a lot of heated argument within the Bitcoin community at that point. Another guy, Eric Voorhees, wrote an excellent article about how please don't do this. This is really damaging to everybody who's trying to use Bitcoin as money. And so that was one of the first internal arguments. And then later it turned it into the full-on block size, civil war within Bitcoin. And a lot of people today won't realize this. The big blockers, the people that wanted the block size to be increased and Bitcoin to be usable as money for the world, we were the majority. We were the significant majority. And then what happened is that one of the minority position members, though, owned the major discussion platform for this, right? Our Bitcoin on Reddit and bitcointalk.org. And then overnight, when it was clear that the big blockers had the majority, you had almost all the businesses. You had the BitPays, the blockchains, the Coinbases, Bitcoin.com. I don't think it existed yet at that point, but you had everybody that was actually trying to use it as money supported the big blocks. And then the censorship started. And then anybody espousing the big block Bitcoin should be money position would literally have their post deleted. And then all the people that came to Bitcoin afterwards that wound up on these, our Bitcoin or bitcointalk.org, they only were allowed to hear one side of the debate. And now that millions of new people have come to Bitcoin after the censorship started, they only heard the debate. And so everybody in the ecosystem used to, call me Bitcoin Jesus. Now a lot of people claim I'm a scammer, and I'm espousing the exact same thing. But the reason that was able to take root is because millions of, maybe the entire cryptocurrency community was 1 million people. And then since that time, since the censorship started, 10 million people came in, and they only got to hear that one position. So now the people that were, influenced by the propaganda and the censorship, they outnumber the original people that knew the truth 10 to 1. And so you can see there's really interesting psychological examples of that, where they basically trick people with peer pressure into doing things, and they have no idea why they're doing it, and they just repeat it. Just like every little kid believes in Santa Claus because everybody around them tells them Santa Claus is real. Now everybody thinks, oh, Bitcoin wasn't supposed to be money, it was supposed to be a store of value, and big blocks are stupid, because that's the only thing that they were allowed to hear because of the censorship when all this was going on. That's still going on to this very day. Like, you can't talk about these things on our Bitcoin, which is the biggest discussion platform by far for Bitcoin related things.
So, and I think we can keep hitting on it, right? I've heard you say a few times, like, I bet you people won't remember this, or I bet you people aren't aware of this, right? And this is actually exactly why we want to have this conversation, right? Because for this next generation of CS majors, data science majors, finance majors, law people that want to work in, and really go down the blockchain path, or, however you want to consider that, in a multitude of applications. I have always looked at this space a little bit from the outside. It's just like, yeah, it's a little bit of like a popularity contest, right? It's clearly there's emotions. People probably are not always thinking clearly. There's kind of a mob mentality, I think, at certain moments, right? Same thing with the news cycle nowadays. I just think it's important to kind of take a step back and like walk through these processes, right? So I want to jump off kind of the 2013 era. And if I were to summarize it from what I'm hearing from you, it's like, it seems like for adoption, it's like a bit of a golden era. It's, the Bitpay is kind of the way to actually do transactions with Bitcoin. The Coinbases of the world, et cetera, are really starting to come in play. That infrastructure, we need to really drive adoption in the initial phases, then deploy it after we acquire it, is really starting to shore up. We're hitting some roadblocks with things like Mt. Gox, et cetera. But it sounds like, there's a larger conversation like around those. By the way, like, who are the people that are, for anyone that doesn't know, who are the people that have kind of played with the block size limits that you think have kind of caused some of this internal strife? Are these the core devs, like Blockstream teams? Is this who you're referring to?
Yeah, so there isn't really a single main thing that you can point the finger to. So when Bitcoin first launched, there was I think the blocks were like, there was no block size limit whatsoever, right? And then later they were worried about, people could DDoS the network, so we'll put in a temporary 1 megabyte limit. And then Satoshi himself literally wrote the code to get rid of that and increase it. He also said very clearly, I believe the exact quote was, the ultimate solution is to just allow the blocks to get as big as they need to be. And so that was very clearly and in fact, if you can go on the Internet Archive and look at the original bitcoin.org from 2011, and you can go and look at the FAQ there, and you can see it goes over very clearly how Bitcoin on chain, by allowing the blocks just to become bigger, can scale to be money for the entire world. So it was right there on the original website. And that was one of the very first questions I had when I heard about Bitcoin. I said, well, can this scale for everybody to use it? And they go over the math right there. Of course, it's all been deleted from bitcoin.org now, but you can go and use the Internet Archive at, I think, archive.org, and look at the early 2011, 2012, probably even into 2013. It was still on the bitcoin.org website explaining how Bitcoin could become used as money for the entire world simply by increasing the block size and allowing people to make on-chain transactions. And so a lot of people probably don't realize that either.
But who, like in 2013, who would these people be? Like if you were to like put a face on, and I want people like, if some kid today creates some new thing and then it goes live and 5-6 years later, he has some community trying to take it over from him, right? Like what should he watch? Like, who are those people? And like, how did they get their influence? I mean, it sounds like they had social channels or access to them, but what are some lessons you think people could take from that era?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things, so there's this guy using the screen name Famous, right? And he's the guy that somehow got the moderatorship position for our Bitcoin and bitcointalk.org. Nobody knows who this guy is. So he's just some anonymous guy. And then I forget which year it was now, but you can find there's like a podcast and some articles about it. But like all of a sudden overnight, there were all these other moderators on our Bitcoin that the community knew. They had real names. One of them was like Jason King, who had this charity that was helping homeless people with Bitcoin in Florida. All of a sudden overnight, he kicked off all of the moderators and put in a whole bunch of new moderators that nobody knew and weren't linked to any real world identities or anything at all. And like, is that the CIA taking over the discussion platforms? Maybe. If you read the CIA's handbook on how to disrupt social movements, that's exactly one of the things from their playbook is to take over the discussion platforms, then cause a bunch of dissent, and that's exactly what happened to Bitcoin. So way wilder conspiracy theories have turned out to be true than that the government intentionally disrupted Bitcoin from within. Like that's very well within the realm of possibility. So to answer your question, where did most of this come from? There was a company called Blockstream that raised like $100 million plus from traditional banks and finances. One of the founders was this guy named Adam Back, who had literally had an invitation directly from Satoshi though to get involved in Bitcoin before the project even launched. Adam Back ignored it and didn't have any interest in it at all until Bitcoin had already hit about $1,000 in 2013. And that's when he decided to finally get involved after I'd already been promoting it full time for almost 3 years.
It's real convenient at that point.
Yeah, real convenient at that point, exactly. So anyhow, his business came in called Blockstream, and basically, if you look at it, their entire business model is to force people to use their products, and they can charge a little. Maybe force is a strong word, but they want people to use their cryptocurrency related products, and they can charge a tiny fee every time somebody uses one of their products. But the key point here is that nobody would need to use any of their products at all if Bitcoin had just been allowed to scale on chain. There would be zero demand or zero need for the products that Blockstream was created. So from a business standpoint, it's very, very clear what they did. They crippled Bitcoin and then are selling a solution to the fact that they already crippled it. It would be just like me if I whacked your legs out with a baseball bat and said, hey, I have a pair of crutches I'll sell you. That's exactly what Blockstream did to Bitcoin. And it's really frustrating to see that have happened. And they raised all their money from the traditional banks and insurance companies. And I don't know much about the Bilderberg group. Everybody loves to hate on them on the internet. I don't know much about them, but that was one of the entities that they raised money from. So like all your conspiracy theorists, guys, get ready and figure out what the connection is between the Bilderberg and Blockstream. Like I said, I don't know, but I hear lots of noise about the Bilderbergers doing secret things. Well, they're one of the ones that funded Blockstream as well. So.
Yeah, it's funny sometimes the trends that we see, and just they're almost laughable. But when you see them enough times in a row, you're almost naive not to put the puzzle pieces together. Hey, so there's a bunch of things I want to get to. It's whether it's Bitcoin Cash. I really want your opinion on adoption because I think that's a critical portion to this whole puzzle that people don't really understand enough. Whether it's fiat on ramps, etc., where we're kind of going with government regulation, etc. But to kind of pivot off 2013, 2014, and I think kind of put a cap here to this timeline, right? Which I think is a good lesson for people. What are like so we got 2013, 2014. What are those next? Is it 2016, 2017? You think that's like the real landmark moment? And what do you think it is?
Yeah, I think the real landmark moment was at the end of 2017 when the blocks finally did become full. So myself and all these other early adopters have been ringing the alarm bell and saying, please don't let the blocks become full. This will be a disaster for adoption and fewer people will be able to use Bitcoin. And then finally the blocks actually did become full. And we saw for the first time in the entire history of Bitcoin, we saw negative adoption. Companies that used to accept Bitcoin stopped accepting Bitcoin. Microsoft stopped accepting Bitcoin. Steam stopped accepting Bitcoin. And these companies literally put out blog posts explaining we are stopping to accept Bitcoin because the fees are too high and the network is too unreliable because of the full blocks and the network congestion that it causes. Like they literally put out blog posts saying that. And then today we're seeing, just earlier this week or last week, we're seeing, these small block BTC guys today are trying to rewrite that history, and they're claiming that these businesses didn't stop accepting Bitcoin because of the fees. Whereas if you go back and look, the businesses literally said openly that they stopped accepting it because of the high fees and the unreliable network congestion caused by the full blocks. And so it's really frustrating to see the rewriting of history that's going on. But anyhow, at the end of 2017, the blocks became full. And a lot of people won't know this again, but the average Bitcoin transaction fee got to be over $50 for a single transaction. And many people were paying more than $1,000 for a single transaction. In fact, there were more than 30,000 transactions in which people paid more than $1,000 for a single transaction. And there's more than 300,000 transactions in which people paid more than $100 in fees just to make their Bitcoin transaction. In fact, not only did the network congestion and fees get so bad that companies like Microsoft and Steam and Newegg and on and on and on had to stop accepting Bitcoin. Even Bitcoin.com had to start promoting something other than Bitcoin. That's how big of a problem it was. And in the meantime, the CTO of this company, Blockstream, that raised the money from all these traditional financial institutions and successfully crippled Bitcoin, the CTO was literally, he wrote an email to this email list saying, "This is a great success for Bitcoin. The fees are over $50 each. I'm popping the champagne to celebrate." And every single person that was trying to use Bitcoin as money in their business was just, pulling their hair out with frustration because the network became unusable. And another, I guess, just double standard that you see from a lot of these people, they don't understand. The Bitcoin BTC core developers, they want the fees to be high. They want the on-chain fees to be high. They want it to be $100 or more. And yet you see all these people in the general public saying, "Oh, well, this week I only had to pay 5 cents for a Bitcoin transaction." And so it's one or the other. Either you want the fees to be high or you want the fees to be low. You can't have this double standard, yet that's exactly what we have within the Bitcoin community. There's either a bunch of people that are willfully misconstruing the position there, and on one day they'll say, "Oh, the fees are low, this is great," and on the next they'll say the fees are high, this is great. Or there's just a bunch of people that aren't aware of the fact that they want the fees to be high. So if you want the fees to be low and fast, cheap, reliable transactions all day, every day for years into the future, Bitcoin Cash has that roadmap, and that's why I switched to Bitcoin Cash to be promoting, with my time and effort and energy rather than Bitcoin at this point, because it's the same vision of peer-to-peer cash for the world that I got involved in 2011. The thing everybody's calling Bitcoin today isn't, and stopped working that way. And it's not nearly as useful in commerce. The only thing it has going for it now is the network effect of the Bitcoin name that people like myself built up for it, and this bigger network effect and user base. But don't underestimate a bad user experience driving people to other platforms, just like we saw with the migration from MySpace to Facebook, or even before that from Friendster to MySpace, or even before Friendster to High Five. That just shows how old I am for anybody that remembers that one.
I don't even know that one. So, and I usually know most tech, but so, I mean, I kind of want to ask, where do you think it sounds like there's like a war breaking out. It sounds like it's literally leveling or rendering the network almost is kind of grinding to a halt. We kind of hit a new point of fees. Now it's a conversation topic. I find sometimes people kind of blatantly ignore things or blindly ignore things until it hits their wallet, right? Or some other place they care. Then, oh yeah, it cost me a lot of money today to send my Bitcoin. I'm going to go look online and see what that says, right? So maybe there's there's a lot of eyeballs around it. How does your place in that conversation really start to come out? Like, are there some specific actions where you feel like you're kind of drawn out into that fight? Do you feel like you kind of let it? It was, I really believe this and I see what's going on and I think I can change it.
So initially I was actually silent in regards to the scaling debate because I thought, well, maybe there is some sort of a computer science reason to limit the block size and have the blocks be limited to 1 megabyte. So I was just quiet and just was watching and reading and listening to the different arguments. And in my heart, I was already a big blocker, but I thought, maybe there's something I don't understand. I want to keep an open mind. And if I learn something new, I'll change my opinion. And so I was quiet. And this, for several months, I was just watching and listening to the debate. And then the censorship started. And when the censorship started, I just, used some logic here. And I said, if you have a strong argument with reasons and facts and logic on your side, you don't need censorship. The only reason you would need censorship is if you have a weak argument and the facts and logic and reason aren't on your side. And so when the censorship started in favor of the small blocks, that's when I started speaking out against the small blocks and started speaking out against the censorship and in favor of, the position that I had to begin with. And so that's still going on to this very day. If small block Bitcoin is a good idea, you don't need censorship to convince people of that. You don't need propaganda to convince people of that. And so that's what made me become loud and vocal in the debate, was when the censorship started. Before that, I was basically silent in regards to the debate. And it's really, I think, hypocritical about so many of these people. Like, Bitcoin's supposed to be censorship-resistant money, yet these people are claiming that it's okay to engage in censorship to protect Bitcoin as censorship-resistant money. Like, the ends don't justify the means. The ends are the means. So if you use a whole bunch of censorship to try and build something, what you wind up with is a whole bunch of censorship. Even if you lie to yourself claiming, oh, we're trying to build censorship-resistant money, that's just you can't build. There's no unethical way of achieving ethical goals. And so if you're using a whole bunch of unethical tools to try and achieve something ethical, you're going to fail. It's impossible.
So you feel like you were kind of, you couldn't break those censorship barriers or whatever those like platforms or those conversations were. So you started going around them or trying to go through them, or what?
Trying to go around them and trying to go through them. And so here's another thing a lot of people won't know. So on our Bitcoin, again, and for a long time, I don't know if the data is still the case to this day, but for years, our Bitcoin had more people talking about Bitcoin and discussing and getting their Bitcoin news than every single other Bitcoin website on the internet combined. So that's how big of an important tool this was. So I'm not like overplaying the importance of this. It had more traffic and more people than every single other Bitcoin website combined. And the most upvoted post ever in the entire history of that subreddit was right after the censorship started. People started saying, hey, the censorship's not okay. We need a bunch of new moderators that allow people to discuss this. And it was the most upvoted post ever in the entire history of our Bitcoin. And after it had been the most upvoted post ever, it got banned and it got deleted. They censored that one as well. So the most upvoted post ever calling for new moderators to allow people to discuss Bitcoin on our Bitcoin got censored. So like, if that doesn't tell you all you need to know about the mentality of these people, I don't think anything will. So, but a lot of people aren't aware of that today. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to remind people of this. Thank you for that.
If Roger Ver, a lot of people probably wonder how much money Roger Ver has. If Roger Ver had enough money to buy a time machine and he could go back to like 2016, 2017 to give old Roger Ver some advice, what's one thing you would have done differently during that time to really like combat it like in a slightly different way?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know how it would have changed my actions, but I underestimated how effective the censorship was going to be. I really underestimated just how effective that was going to be. And so in today, you know, I have a few more years of experience under my belt. Like, wow, is the censorship effective? And I guess another, if I can tell a related background story to this. So like in America, we all feel like, oh, we have free speech and we can talk about things and learn about things. And like, to some extent, that's true. Within the Bitcoin community, there's definitely some, you know, manipulation going on. But like, here's an example of like how strong this censorship can be. So like for those of us that are old enough to remember like the Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing, China, a bunch of college kids were protesting in favor of democracy in China, and they were, you know, literally chanting and the Chinese government sent in the Chinese army, and the students were, you know, chanting like the People's Army cannot fire upon the people. Well, they were wrong about that, right? It wasn't the People's Army to begin with, and boy, did they ever fire upon the people. And, you know, a huge number of people were killed, college kids there in China. And today, nobody's allowed to talk about that in China. There's this huge amount of like censorship on the Chinese internet, and there's the Great Firewall of China that prevents people from even hearing about that. And I remember, it's been a while now, maybe 15 years ago, I was in Japan, and I met a Chinese girl, and we started hanging out, and you know, we both were speaking Japanese to each other because that was the language we had the most in common. And you know, I was complaining about stuff the U.S. government does or something like that. And she said to me, she's like, yeah, I understand why you complain about the U.S. government. They do a lot of really bad stuff, but like, why would you hate the Chinese government? Like they would never do anything bad to the people. And I looked at her, I said, you think that? And she's like, yeah, they're here to help us. And then so I sat her down in front of YouTube, and I showed her some of these Tiananmen Square videos that she had never been allowed to see before because she'd been living in China up to that point. And it literally just shattered her entire worldview to where she started crying and the tears were coming down her face. And she said, oh my God, I didn't know any of this. I can't believe this. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. And so she's forever had her worldview changed. And I think a lot of people, if they knew and fully understood what went on within the scaling debate within Bitcoin and the underhanded, you know, lying, cheating, and stealing and shenanigans that went on there, I think they'd have a really, really different opinion in regards to you know, what's the real Bitcoin today, and you know, what sort of things went on there. And so if you're not allowed to be exposed to the information, you can't have an informed opinion on the information. So you should ask yourself, why would these people, to this very day within, you know, Bitcoin, BTC, why are they trying to prevent people from being exposed to new information? And I think the answer is clear. They've succeeded in undermining Bitcoin's ability to be peer-to-peer cash for the world, or at the very least delayed it by, you know, maybe a decade. And that's exactly what the governments around the world would want. That's what the CIA and IRS and everybody else would want, but that's not what every individual that values people having more control over their own lives and their own money should want. So it's really disappointing how they've tricked the world into into supporting an asset that doesn't have the ability to bring as much economic freedom to the world as the original vision would have.
100%. And I agree with a lot of the points you're saying in censorship. You know, I think even going back to 2015 election, whether you believe Russia infiltrated Facebook and these like posts, right? And then how that kind of bot war went down. Regardless, if there was a pendulum that swung, it's Zuckerberg and Facebook being brought in front of Congress and the Googles and the Twitters of the world, where they're almost being pushed now, right, to be the ones to like, you know, hey, Facebook, why aren't you, right? It's a really slippery slope, right? Like everybody, go ahead.
If I can interject a little bit there too, and let's talk about the incredibly hypocritical double standard from the U.S. on that. The U.S. government is mad. Maybe Russia manipulated our election by buying ads on Facebook, right? Or look at what the U.S. government does. They manipulate every election around the world, and if the guy that they don't want to win wins, sometimes they literally go in and assassinate that person. They'll kill the guy that wins the election if they don't like the outcome of that election. And the U.S. is mad about other countries interfering in their election. That's one of the biggest hypocritical double standards like in the history of the world there. So please continue.
You can get a Jimmy Kimmel clip in the middle of the street somewhere in middle America outside of, you know, some large box retailer and ask a random question. Do you think it's bad that we killed this person or like turned over their government or stole their election? You know, well, no, right? And we could pull out like the general comedy points. They did it for freedom, or they did it to protect us, or dig a little deeper. They can't pick out this country on the globe, and then you can start to get a little scared, right? Before you say, if you have so much absolute belief in something that you don't even know where they are geographically, right? And so I tend to agree with you on that point, right? Where it's yeah, I don't even know how you get mad at Russia tries to take over one of your elections when you could just go down the list of like declassified reports from 50 years ago and like, well, we clearly were okay with killing people because they didn't do what we wanted, right? It's Facebook ads and groups start to get a bit deprioritized in regards to morals. But hey, so I want to back out of this, and thanks again for going with me. And I think it kind of leads us up to the larger conversation. So you know, there's this wall, the Great Wall of Bitcoin sounds like it's getting thrown up in censorship. You're kind of starting to battle this and go around them, go through them in certain ways. And I think you just told us if you could go back, you'd probably want to realize more at the time, you know, just how strong that force field was, right? Maybe you would approach it a little bit differently. So then what is your answer? This is Bitcoin Cash, or was there anything before that or that kind of culminated or got to a point with Bitcoin Cash?
So a lot of people, here's another thing a lot of people won't know. A lot of people think I created Bitcoin Cash. I had nothing to do with the creation of Bitcoin Cash. I had zero to do with the creation of that one. I had zero to do with the creation of Bitcoin. But once it became clear that Bitcoin was no longer going to be allowed to scale to be money for the world, I could either, I had two options. I could either, retire and, live out my life on a beach, which isn't fulfilling for me, right? Like I want to make the world a better place for everybody, and I want to build the tools and infrastructure to do that. And so then I had to look around and say, okay, well, if Bitcoin can't become money for the world any longer, which one has the best shot at doing that? And Bitcoin Cash had already been around for maybe 4 or 5 months at that point. And Bitcoin Cash seemed like it had the best shot at doing that. And so I owned, Bitcoin.com, and Bitcoin Cash already had a lot of traction. And so, okay, boom, I decided to promote Bitcoin Cash as peer-to-peer cash for the world. And if you look at the way the split happened, like there used to just be one single version of Bitcoin, and that one single version of Bitcoin split into 2 versions. One is still called Bitcoin today, and it wound up having all the infrastructure go with it technically because of the way the split happened technically. But all the vision and the user experience and the reasons that Bitcoin became popular to begin with were on the Bitcoin Cash side of the split. And so Bitcoin Cash has to rebuild all the infrastructure and all the wallets and all the exchange integrations and all this stuff. And it doesn't have the Bitcoin name any longer, right? It doesn't have that same network effect that had been built up by people like me on Bitcoin, but it has that good user experience of fast, cheap, reliable payments for the world. In fact, that's a perfect segue. So anybody that, when you guys watch this, I have $25 private keys here. All you need is a Bitcoin.com wallet or any other wallet that can scan a private key. And each person that scans one of these will get $5 in Bitcoin Cash. And these are on-chain transactions right here on the Bitcoin Cash network. And this isn't possible to do with Bitcoin today because the fees are too high on Bitcoin, right? So the fees today, as we're recording this, are about $2 or so on the Bitcoin network. and they're a fraction of a penny on the Bitcoin Cash network, right? So if you go and if these were Bitcoin, if you'd scan one for $5, you'd have to pay $2 in fees to move the money to your wallets. Then you'd only wind up with $3. And then when you want to go and spend your $3, it would cost you another $2. And the person that receives the $1 that's left over wouldn't be able to spend it at all because the fees are more than the $1 that he received. And so that's not usable as peer-to-peer cash for the world. So what I just did there by giving away that money isn't possible on Bitcoin any longer, but it was easily possible in the early days in Bitcoin. And so that thing is now still possible on Bitcoin Cash. And so that's another example of how Bitcoin Cash has all the characteristics that made Bitcoin popular to begin with. The only thing Bitcoin still has is the Bitcoin name and the bigger network effect, but that's changing. We can see people all over the world. In fact, I was talking earlier today with a top 10 social networking app in the entire world wants to integrate Bitcoin Cash payments into their networking app. And I can't wait to work with them to make that happen as well, because it works. They would rather use Bitcoin, right? But like Bitcoin doesn't work. And so we just saw on Twitter a couple of days too, Brave browser. If you don't have it yet, it's fantastic. I just upgraded from Chrome to Brave. I'm really loving it. They built their in-browser cryptocurrency stuff on Ethereum. They wanted to do it on Bitcoin, but the fees were too high, so they couldn't, and Bitcoin Cash didn't exist yet, so they did it on Ethereum. So there's just all this missed opportunity for Bitcoin that could have taken place if it had just been allowed to scale to be money for the world. I think you're muted.
All right, for all the students out there, Roger just gave you either McDonald's or some beer money or some Gatorade money for the week. So,
but if Bitcoin Cash becomes money for the world, each of these could easily become worth $5,000 per token. So maybe I gave away, a heck of a lot more there, $100,000. Maybe it'll wind up being total.
We have to revisit that in a time capsule. So again, for everybody listening, and I want to be clear, like why I feel this is important to have this conversation, right? These are the points, right? Like, so we're coming to the point now where clearly, like, this guy gives a shit, right? Like he's been an evangelist in the space. He's putting up billboards while you were in middle school, right? He's rallying around, kind of what he sees as the future, right? And I think, maybe read more about him. And I think his background, he mentioned a few things earlier that kind of, I think, led him along that journey, right? To get to that point where Bitcoin kind of made sense, right? Or this world of digital currency kind of made sense. But nonetheless, right, he kind of went through those steps, right? So the last question I'm going to ask in this timeline, and then I want to move on to, I want to hear more about Bitcoin Cash, specifically kind of how that journey is going, how you view adoption. What are some of those, individual components you think going out here, whether it be the next 2 years, 5 years, et cetera, that really is the infrastructure we need, or, are there on both sides of the transactions that really need to be put into place? But, you had mentioned earlier that everybody loved you at one point, and then you, for whatever reason, maybe people were trying to turn people against you, or right, people are getting upset, or there was misinformation. Do you feel like you kind of started around the time of Bitcoin Cash? Like, was it because you backed the dog in the fight that wasn't necessarily the one that other people wanted, or?
That certainly added to it, but lots of times people that tell the truth aren't popular. And look what happened to Galileo, right? Like they literally killed him for saying the truth. So the truth isn't always popular, but it's still the truth. And the truth today is that Bitcoin Cash works better as cash than Bitcoin, and that's something that's hurtful to people that are hoping to get rich by holding Bitcoin, because that truth damages Bitcoin's ability to have a whole bunch more people buy into the fake news that Bitcoin is cool. When the reality is that Bitcoin Cash provides the same user experience that made Bitcoin popular to begin with, and the thing everyone's calling Bitcoin today no longer does.
But like, what were those like specifics? Like, I mean, whatever. I mean, many people probably have different perceptions of you, right? Like, this is my first time talking to you. I can see you're a super nice guy and obviously care. Like, what do you want people to know about you that they don't know, basically? Like, where do you think it's kind of being sold improperly or being conflated?
One of the things that kind of pushes my buttons that I think is not correct is a lot of people say, oh, Roger's just, he's desperately trying to pump Bcash so he can get rich and get a bunch of money. Like, I have more money than I know what to do with for the rest of my life. I'm not here to earn more money. I'm here because I want, for my own personal reasons, to bring more economic freedom to the world. I was a retired multi-millionaire before Bitcoin had even been invented. And then I bought a bunch of Bitcoin. you can do the math and figure out, like, I'm not here because I need to increase the price of Bitcoin Cash so I can, buy a new Lamborghini. I had a Lamborghini before Bitcoin had ever even been invented. And I sold my Lamborghini in 2012 to buy more Bitcoin. A lot of people won't know that. You hear all these people out there saying, oh, I want to get a Lambo when the price goes to the moon. Well, I sold my Lambo in 2012 to buy more Bitcoin. And so the thing, I guess, if I want people to know, it pushes my buttons, like when you claim, oh, Roger's just trying to pump, Bitcoin Cash to, earn more money. Like, yeah, if Bitcoin Cash does well, I'll earn more money. But like, the goal here is I want to undermine government's ability to manipulate the economy and meddle in what people are doing with their own money. I want each individual to be in charge of their own money. That's why I'm giving away free Bitcoin Cash to everybody that I meet, just like I used to do with Bitcoin. And it wasn't exaggeration when I said that each one of these could easily become worth $5,000 someday. In the early days of Bitcoin, I was going around and I would give every single person that I would meet an entire Bitcoin, right? And an entire Bitcoin today is worth around $10,000 when you add up all the different forks that went along the way there as well. So like, it's not hyperbole to say that that could be worth a lot of money someday, but the way it becomes worth a lot of money someday is to build all the infrastructure to allow people to actually use it in their lives as money. And if you don't make it useful, people aren't going to use it. So I'm busy trying to build all those tools to make Bitcoin Cash useful for the world. So I guess that's the thing that I want people to know is if you want somebody to use something, make it useful. And that's what I'm busy trying to do.
Got it. All right. So appreciate you kind of taking us through that, right? And we could go to today, but I think it's probably, that conversation I think will kind of be pulled out. So I've heard you talk about adoption multiple times in this call, right? And when I think from my perception, like how you're kind of explaining Bitcoin Cash is, it can actually be used for transactions, right? Maybe that's one of the core points of it. And I tend to agree with you, right? I have tried to be as big a proponent, whether it is gift cards or Bitcoin to gift card to buy an Airbnb instead of just sending like money through it or whatever, is really try to test the technology, like for any single thing I could pay for it, within reason, like really try to use it, right? Same with Bitcoin Cash, etc. Right? So how do you view adoption, right? Like, do you think we've just come nothing but like a really long way in an amazing way the last few years? Do you feel like the promises kind of sold short? And the other half of that, what, and for example, I was before leading up to this Christmas, I had just for fun, my team had extra spare time. So I ran a whole campaign, like call it Bitcoin for Christmas, right? Just all these dumb videos, like how to teach grandma how to like handle Bitcoin, like, right? Like, and I do believe there's like generational gaps, right? So I think there's a bunch of money that hasn't even come to the table yet because it's just really complicated, right? And like they still kind of view this as like some black box that they don't want to touch, right? It's like I don't use I always hear not old people but like older people sometimes, I didn't use Facebook. I don't use Facebook, right, for many years, and then they start to realize that they don't interact with their family as much, and maybe their grandson knows all the birthdays more than they do, right? Okay, now grandmas start using Facebook, or I don't use smartphones, and then right, they kind of graduate to it. So in some ways, I think there's a generational divide where we need to kind of get these people online. I think there's institutional aspects, which are fiat on ramps, exchanges. You have a ton of regulation. So I know I'm kind of throwing a lot out there, but when you go out the next few years, like what are the 2 to 3 most important key aspects that you think really glue everything together, whether it's even from the merchant side, et cetera, that kind of enable adoption of cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I think we have to make cryptocurrency more useful than whatever people are using currently. If it's not significantly more useful than PayPal or Visa or Bank of America, people aren't going to switch, right? So like nobody likes, there's a switching cost, right? It takes time and effort to learn something new. And if it's not significantly better than what you're using now, nobody's going to make that time or effort. And so one of my favorite examples of that is this company called Purse.io. You can buy anything you want off Amazon at like a 25% discount by using Bitcoin Cash. And it's only slightly more work than using Amazon directly with your credit card. And so for 25% savings, you can definitely do significantly more work. And I just recently bought a new drone. I saved almost $400 on the drone by using Bitcoin Cash on Purse.io. It was normally the drone was $2,000. I paid $1,600 by using Bitcoin Cash, right? It was a little bit more work than clicking normally on Amazon, but for $400 savings, you can do a little bit of extra work. So it's a fantastic way for actual real people to start using Bitcoin cash in their daily lives. And you can still use Bitcoin on that platform, but you'll be paying an extra, a couple dollar fees to move your Bitcoin around each time, and it might take longer. Whereas Bitcoin Cash, boom, fast, cheap, and reliable payments.
So do you think that there's like a bunch of either online retailer or physical in-store merchant integrations that need to happen? I mean, is that like a big cornerstone? And then on top of that, like, do you think that regulators are going to try to stop it, and that'll be another half of the battle?
Well, they already have stopped it to some extent. And in the U.S., like technically every single time you spend some Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, you're supposed to keep track of everything for your tax filings and whatnot, because they decided that Bitcoin is property, not money. If they decided Bitcoin is money, then people would be able to spend it as money, and it wouldn't, just like when you spend $1 each time, you don't have to keep track of like, what was the exchange rate fluctuation on the dollar to whatever else. So I think they already have delayed it. But what's the big missing piece? I think the big missing piece that we don't have enough infrastructure yet is for payroll processors, right? Imagine if all the businesses start paying the employees in cryptocurrency. Suddenly then all the employees will have cryptocurrency, and there'll be more people out there in the economy using it, and the rest of the infrastructure will grow in accordance with that. So there's no one single magic bullet. You need all the pieces to work together to really make a big difference.
And the last point on that, if you could change anything right now in the space for adoption, whether it be regulation or perception, like what's the one thing you think that would need to be moved right now?
I think the biggest one single thing for adoption would be the regulatory environment rule that Bitcoin is money and can be used as money, and that you don't have to keep track of every last little thing for capital gains tax. If a Bitcoin's $10,000 today and you buy coffee, and then you buy more coffee tomorrow and it's $11,000, that shouldn't be a capital gains taxable event, and that's the way it is right now, and that's a giant hindrance.
So what countries get that right?
Well, here in St. Kitts, where I'm recording this from, you can use Bitcoin as money, and there's no capital gains tax nonsense required. In fact, there's even no income tax here. You don't even have to file a tax return at the end of the year. So, sorry, one noise distracted me. So anyhow, you don't even have to file a tax return at the end of the year. And if you want to become a citizen here, you can pay for the entire thing in Bitcoin Cash. You can email me at roger@bitcoin.com if you want to do that. And so that's a pretty big deal. But if you're in the US, like, you can beg your politician for their permission. I just saw on Twitter earlier today some alleged public servant in California. She literally said on Twitter, "F Elon Musk." And it's just maddening to me. Like, Elon Musk has provided how many jobs and produced how many amazing cars and amazing technologies for the world, and he's mad because and his companies have done a better job. They've been building respirators for the coronavirus stuff too, and his factories in China did a great job of not getting people infected. And this lady, like, they're the U.S., the California state government's trying to prevent Tesla from reopening. And he said, "Okay, we're going to Nevada and Texas." And her reply was, "F Elon Musk." And like, these people have the audacity to call themselves public servants. Like, what would you do if your servant told you, F you? Like, that's not how a servant talks to their employer. That's how the master talks to their servant. And so anyhow, I'm just really fed up with the whole thing. And I see cryptocurrencies as a way to disempower these public servants that tell the public F you or F off. And that's what has me so excited about cryptocurrencies, especially ones that work as cash.
Got it. All right. So two last things I want to talk about if you have time. So one is, what excites you today? Like, what does your daily workload look like? What really excites you when you think 12, 24 months out? And then just briefly, I want to touch on maybe some advice you have for some of the college students that are listening to this conversation.
Yeah, so daily life during the coronavirus lockdown looks like I wake up around 6 or 6:30, and then work on the computer until around 10 p.m. when I go to bed again. And the last couple of days, I haven't even left the house once, partially because the last couple of days were locked down. Anyhow, on normal life, it's pretty similar, only I try to fit some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in. That's my hobby outside of cryptocurrency and working. I really enjoy that. So, but advice to young people, I think I have some really good advice. Go and pick up books. Read these books, right? Reading a book is like having a one-on-one tutoring session from some of the greatest, thinkers in all of human history. So go and pick up books by some of these, great thinkers. Pick up the Milton Friedmans, the Murray Rothbards, the Adam Smiths, the Ray Kurzweils. Read these guys' books, because what more could you want? It's like literally having a one-on-one tutoring session with some of the greatest minds to ever live. So go and pick up and read more books, and and don't necessarily expect your, college professors to know everything about everything or be able to, tell you everything about everything. Like, think for yourself, critically evaluate everything that you hear, and reading books is the best. It's such a wonderful thing. And then your education should never end. You should always be learning new things, but it's important, like while you're young, you want to learn as much as you can, as fast as you possibly can. So that way you get to benefit from it from the rest of your career and the rest of your life. If you're 20 years old today, you're probably going to live at least another 60 years, at least. And hopefully with human lifespan technology, you'll live, a couple thousand more years. But if it's at least 60 years, you learn a whole bunch of stuff now, you have 60 years to benefit from it. Sometimes I see people that are in their 60s that decide to go back to college, and like, yeah, I guess you can, but like that time would have been spent better in your 20s doing that, or your teens doing that, because then you would have had the next 40 years to benefit from the knowledge that you learned from going to school at that point. So learn as much as you can really quickly while you're young, and then don't stop learning later. But the sooner you learn something in your life, the more time you have to benefit from that knowledge and experience.
God, I can't remember how much Bitcoin Cash Roger gave away earlier, but I'll put up $250 myself, and if Roger wants to send us a list of books that he recommends, I'll put up $250. We'll do some giveaway here, and we'll ship out some of the books you can pick from Roger's list to any of the students.
You can even order the books with the Bitcoin Cash on purse.io at like a 25% discount.
We'll do that. We'll do that. There you go. I'll buy Bitcoin Cash, send it to you. We'll order on Purse. So you'll hold me to that. So. Roger, I appreciate your time. I know we ran a bit over. I think it was, and again, to kind of recap, I think it was a good conversation, right? I think it's, we could sit here and get into long debates about block sizes. We get to long debates about, right? Like, it really gets stuck in the weeds, I think, on certain things, which I'm sure you've been in a ton of those conversations. And there's so many different kind of contentious points online, right? And I think people need to think for themselves to a certain extent. But I think one of the things to really get that going is to kind of zoom out, right? And just make should not be a war in the space. There shouldn't be so much, absoluteness into everyone's conversation. There was a lot of history that led up to this, right? Like, you didn't just come in one day and say, screw it, right? Like, you were a huge proponent of the market, right? And I think it's important for people to really kind of hear that journey. And I think hopefully it helps influence their decision-making, right? Whatever step they take, and how deep they get into this space or others. But again, just want to say I appreciate your time. And any last words before we run?
Yeah, if you haven't tried cryptocurrencies, go and try them. There's so many amazing things that can be done. If you're a software developer, check out developer.bitcoin.com. We have all sorts of developer tooling kit, SDKs over there for you to get started. And if you just want to see it in action too, another great website. I have nothing to do with this website, but I think it's a great way for people to be exposed to cryptocurrencies, blockchain.poker. And you can go, they'll give you a tiny bit of cryptocurrency for free, and then you can play poker on the internet with other people around the world. And it's a really great tool for people to see the magic of cryptocurrency. It's blockchain.poker.
Awesome. Well, hey, again, for everybody watching, just want to say we appreciate your time. Obviously, we're going live here for 72 hours. A bunch more exciting interviews to go. You just got the opportunity to get some Bitcoin Cash. Hopefully you were fast enough to get it. I'm going to double it down with some books if Roger wants to provide his list of recommendations. And let's keep this conversation going, right? We're here to kind of have an open one. We're going to hear from a diverse set of people. I feel super lucky. You guys should feel super lucky for everybody making their time. It's a good time because everybody has a bit of free time right now, so maybe a bit easier. But Roger, thank you again. We'll go ahead and wrap this up. And guys, look forward to talking to you on the next interview. Have a good day, everyone.
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.